Alright, we're in a very older section of Rock Creek Cemetery. That was the original edge of that road right up there, and then in the 1900s they started spilling over into here and they built these roads and expanded all the way to its modern edge over there to the street just over there. And so these are not back to the 1700s or 1800s. This particular notable person, there's a cemetery marker stone, by the way. And anyways, he was a newspaper correspondent, and his name was William Eleroy Curtis. And he had a big funeral, and his contemporary and friends thought fit to bring a huge boulder out here and put a plaque. And then later on, a plaque was added for his wife. And he was born William Eleroy Curtis, spelled in a certain way. And the plaque reads, "For 40 years as a newspaper correspondent, he gave the world true and useful information, not fake news. His fellow men were enlightened and blessed by his work. He wrote of their good deeds only. He died in the fullness of his strength and zeal." And Mr. Curtis died suddenly at age 60, and then his wife passed 13 years later, in 1924. But yeah, he was a newspaper correspondent for 40 years, so we could do an hour documentary on his life. But basically, I was impressed because it's a subject that's near and dear to me, is the late 19th century, and what was happening in 1874. And in 1874, he was a 24-year-old newspaper correspondent. And not many people know, of course, it's hidden history in America, is in 1871, 72, 73, 74, especially 1874, there was massive violence by the White League and the Ku Klux Klan, basically, ex-Confederate soldiers. And they were using violence to stop African Americans, newly freed enslaved people, from getting the right to vote and participating as a first-class citizen. And so they basically killed people. They would block people to voting booths, and they would encourage other cities. And so he basically wrote about, you can look it up in Louisiana. There's a massacre that he wrote about. Here's a picture, by the way, of William Eleroy Curtis. Kind of hard to see with the glare, of course. And basically, he also wrote a story about the Kashuta massacre in Louisiana. And basically, it was, the White League, a white supremacist paramilitary organization, killed a bunch of freed people and stopped them from voting progressives into office. At that point, it was, of course, the Lincoln Black Republican Party that was the progressive party. That was a friend of the blacks. Later on in the 1950s, there was a Freaky Friday switch. That's a whole nother video. But at the time, the racists were going through the Southern Democrat Party. And so in August of 1974, they used violence to suppress freedom and democracy, almost restarting the Civil War again. And so he wrote about it, and then the White League and the Ku Klux Klan later on put a $5,000 bounty on his head, which is about $150,000 in today's money. So they didn't like publicity. They didn't like people telling the truth about them. They love that, that with the lost cause mythology later on about how they were the heroes and they were fighting the scalawags and the carpetbaggers from coming down and taking us over. Well, no, we were just assuring that that the rights that all the U.S. Army soldiers has died for to secure for all the newly freed people down south were being observed, and it wasn't. They had no justice at all. And it was horrible for them for years. So every 10 years, 1870s, later on the 1890s, and of course in the 1920s, the KKK would spring up and suppress elections and everything. There was another one he wrote about, which is the Brooks-Baxter War, and that was in what was it? The Arkansas, where they restarted the Civil War. The Brooks-Baxter War was basically 1,000 militants on each side, militia, and they kind of restarted the Civil War, trying to fight over, because remember, all the southern states had to redraw new state constitutions and be asked to be let back into the Union, and then they could send representatives and senators back to Congress. And so, you know, the reactionaries were mad, and they didn't want, you know, the newly freed blacks to get voting rights and all this stuff. So they fought and rigged elections and used violence and suppressed the vote. It was horrible. And there was in Barber County, Alabama, in 1874, was called the Barber County Massacre. About 50 or so blacks were killed, probably hundreds injured. And of course, there was in 1871, back a few years before, there was a coup in New Orleans where they took the State House building for about 48 hours, and then some more federal troops came, and then they backed down. So 1870s was crazy. When the ex-Confederates, that's why I spelled the Confederacy with 3 Ks, the ex-Confederate soldiers donned, you know, white hoods and became the Ku Klux Klan and the White League, and used violence to suppress democracy in America. It was a pretty bad thing. But this guy had the guts to stand up to it and print the truth about these races, and so, you know, he would back us up with taking down these hideous statues and memorials to these so-called Confederates. No, the truth is they were violent, they were racist, they almost destroyed a nation, destroyed our republic in its teenage years, and it's not a heritage to be proud about it. And people get mad when you speak about the truth. Ask this guy. They wanted to kill him, and people get mad at me when I make these videos and speak this truth. Well, just like him, I have the guts to speak the truth about this. So we need to rethink about this. I know you got so-called Confederate friends. We need to look them in the eye and say, sorry, bud, you've been lied to your whole life with this lost cause mythology. And it was about white supremacy. It was about slavery. And they're not a people to be proud of. They were glad they were defeated. This nation was built on all men are created equal, freedom and liberty, and slavery has no part in that whatsoever. So check out this guy, William Eleroy Curtis. Rests in peace here in Rock Creek Cemetery here in D.C. with a big boulder and plaque. A whole bunch of people were at his funeral, colonels and other correspondents. Rest in peace and speak the truth, people. William Eleroy Curtis.